On today's World Insight, a leg up for Global South countries in dire need, thanks to the United Nations. How does the UN dispense crucial development aid? Answers from Xiaojun Grace Wang, the Trust Fund Director at the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, a part of our special series, United for the Future, the UN at 80.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. So we are bringing to you a special series entitled United for the Future, the UN at 80. Today, let's meet Xiaojun Grace Wang, the Trust Fund Director at the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. In fact, September the 12th, on Friday, is the United Nations Day for South-South Cooperation, celebrating the achievements of developing countries working together to advance the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. China, the largest developing country in the world, is a strong supporter of the UN in that regard and recently proposed the Global Governance Initiative. As we know, funds are always a key element in development. Xiaojun Grace Wang shares her insights on how to make better use of money, the fund, to benefit the people in the Global South and the cooperation between the Global South and the Global North. Take a listen. Grace, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wei.
And happy the UN Day for South-South Cooperation.
Thank you very much.
You are in the most critical position, trying to work with the whole UN system to come up with the funding and also to allocate the funding for the South-South cooperation. What is your take on the role of this day?
I think South-South cooperation is becoming more and more important today because we all know the world is trying to achieve SDGs and our scorecard is not pretty. The recent SDG report reveals that only 35% of SDGs targets are on track. 18% are regressing. So the world has a sense of urgency and looking at ways to cooperate and ways to accelerate SDG achievements. So at this point of the time, we feel there are more momentum and more demand, more expectations for South-South cooperation.
Well, looking at the general picture, one could argue we are already entering into an AI stage, and therefore how much cooperation between the South and South is possible in that regard so that the South is not going to be left behind this time?
This is very critical. I think nowadays digital transformation and green transformation is adding like two wings of a tiger. So South-South cooperation, if leveraging the digital technology, will really advance the progress towards SDGs. However, there are many challenges, I think. First of all, infrastructure. Although we see already improvement of access to internet, now about 68% of people in the world access to internet, but still there's basic digital infrastructure gap. Secondly, I think financing. The financing gap is huge for developing countries. To achieve SDGs, the gap is like $4 trillion every year. However, still developing countries feel challenges in getting loans and getting financing, and the debt service cost is a real burden for many developing countries. So the third, I think, is capacity. The capacity at country level, institutional level, and individual level to leverage the trend of digital advancement. So South-South cooperation has a very important element that is capacity development. Through South-South cooperation, countries can help each other to boost up the capacity to be able to leverage the digital technology.
Right. Since we talk about digital technology, it is only the very preliminary part, right? And now we are already the world moving to the AI stage. That's the latest stage. So if the previous one is not being resolved, is it possible to have a great leap forward to the AI stage? you think?
Well, I think, the Global South has a big diversity of countries. There are some countries, emerging economies, are moving very fast towards the AI and data-driven era to use data solutions. And there are countries that may be at different levels of absorbing capacity of the AI age. I'm a pragmatic, optimistic person. In my experience, I see countries like, for example, of course, China is demonstrating data-driven solutions for disaster risk management using satellite data to not only help national development, but share the data sets, data products with developing countries. And even in LDCs, you also see countries. Yeah, these developing countries, you still see countries leveraging data-driven solutions and AI. We have a project with the support of China and Republic of Korea in Southeast Asian countries and in Mekong River region. So you can see Thailand, they are comparatively advanced. So the collaboration is for Thailand to using data-driven solutions for their water management. And then Lao PDR is kind of at a different level, but also learning from not only China, Republic of Korea, but also Thailand to be able to advance their digital technology, their AI systems. So I think there's hope. It's just we have to tailor those solutions to different contexts.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you see realities like this have on both the speed, efficiency, and the impact of AI transformation among the developing countries, the South as you speak?
In our UN Fund for South-South Cooperation, we recently launched a triangular cooperation window. And there we have contributions from Portugal to support data-driven solutions and capacities for blue economy. Yeah, and we also are talking with Spain to support the triangular cooperation initiative. So like in AI, like in many areas, there are divisions, but there also, I think the more we have cooperation, the future is brighter.
Well, for those who reduce development financing, they argue that the UN system is not efficient enough, and there are a lot of redundancies, even when it comes to supporting for the South. What is your argument?
Well, I think the declining of development financing is not just the declining of financing for the UN, it's the declining of financing for the overall development cooperation system, which is very unfortunate. Yes, UN as the institution, as the Secretary General said, we need to change, and we keep trying to pursue excellence. But it's member states that shapes UN, and member states needs to take decisive ways to find a transformational approach forward in order to empower UN to be more efficient and serving developing countries' needs.
How to bring over the possible progress, as you just suggested?
For quite some decades, there is a level of dependency on, for example, ODA or external support for countries. That is what we feel that sometimes when we do South-South cooperation, we wanted to first make sure the cooperation is demand-driven. It's from the country with its own priorities and strategies. For example, we have several China's experiences of poverty reduction and China's experiences of special economic zones. In some developing countries, it has been successfully adopted, but in other countries, you can see without the basic infrastructure laid out by the government, without the enabling policy environment created, that kind of experiences may not be well adapted or deliver successful results. I think the foundation is still countries' self-reliance and international cooperation, including South-South and triangular cooperation, are complementing and supplementing. It can help to accelerate a country's development, yet the foundation is laid out by the country itself.
But then it's interesting how to assess, isn't it, whether one country is self-reliant and prioritize the certain areas. So it will be quite tricky how to assess that benchmark.
Yeah, there are tools to assess. For example, voluntary national reviews developed by country voluntarily reporting on the progress on SDGs. So there it needs to at first articulate the country's priorities, the country's goals, the country's strategies, and then our colleagues are helping to integrate South-South cooperation into the VNRs so that countries can look at their own progress and what are the progress, the value added by international cooperation, including South-South and triangular cooperation.
The other point about South-South cooperation, many say it is happening tremendously in the green area, for example, clean energy and related areas. But at the same time, you see there was earlier commitment being made there was earlier commitment made by the world as a whole toward the sustainable development goals, many of which deal with climate change, environmental protection, and the list that goes on. But now we are seeing not as strong commitment toward those goals, and some countries even make abrupt turn to embrace fossil fuels, just to name an example. So how do you see the potential area of South-South cooperation in that regard?
Well, I think despite some of the challenges that you just said, countries reversing some of the commitment, still we see more countries adopting renewable energies, and the progress in the SDG 7 has shown some signs of hope. So changes are still possible. In South-South cooperation, I think renewable energy is also a very important area, especially those solutions that are units of renewable energy solutions. For example, the solar panel powered refrigerators for that enabled women to create their own livelihood and economic opportunities. So I think South-South cooperation needs to pay a lot of attention to advance renewable energy and advance sustainable development.
So South-South cooperation, this phrase has been used a lot. I'm sure you know the history of it, but exactly what it means, because if you look at the so-called South countries, China, which is one of the largest economies in the world, is being regarded as South. Well, you have smaller economies that's being regarded as North. So how does that work? What exactly is South-South cooperation?
Well, South-South cooperation is developing countries helping each other. So I think compared to North-South cooperation, I don't think it's just about whose money you are using or who are your partners. I think fundamentally it needs to come back to the history of South-South cooperation and the principles of South-South cooperation. And that makes South-South cooperation distinct. Because South-South cooperation is about respecting sovereignty, creating horizontal mutual benefit relationship. So, meaning developing countries progressing together, sharing with each other their experiences of dealing with similar challenges. And the bread and butter of South-South cooperation is knowledge, is relevant experiences. The bread and butter of South-South cooperation is not just the financing aspect. Even though developing countries, especially emerging economies, are contributing financing as well. But the bread and butter is the relevant experiences.
But one could also ask, what is going to be the relationship between North-South cooperation and South-South cooperation? As a result of emphasizing on South-South cooperation, is there going to be even sharper division between the North and the South?
Well, for South-South cooperation, every year the UN General Assembly will pass a resolution, and that is based on consensus of developed countries and developing countries. South-South cooperation, in that resolution, there's a consistent message that South-South cooperation is complementing, not replacing North-South cooperation. I think South-South cooperation and North-South cooperation are two elements of development cooperation. As I emphasized, this is to support countries based on their own demand, their own priorities, their own goals. So these two elements are complementing each other. I don't think they are conflicting with each other. For example, ODA, Official Development Assistance provided by donor countries from the North, are supporting developing countries, even though it's declining, but it's still a useful source of funding for developing countries. South-South cooperation, complementing that, providing knowledge, experiences, technologies are relevant to the context. So I see these two can build synergy. But at the same time, South-South cooperation is not an approach that is building walls, it is building bridges. For example, triangular cooperation, meaning developed countries providing support to South-South cooperation and eventually benefiting developing countries. So that is why in the UN Fund for South-South Cooperation, we opened triangular cooperation window. And that is not only a window to diversify the sources of funding, but also it brings in expertise, knowledge from developed countries. So I see there is an opportunity, there is a future where developing countries and developed countries working hand in hand in development cooperation. But how far can we reach there and how long it takes? I think, yes, cautiously optimistic.
The UN is celebrating 80th anniversary of a lot of challenges, as we all know. Even the Secretary General put forward a UN 80 initiative. A lot of it is try to deal with these challenges, but answers not yet being provided. So as a result of this, many UN agencies, organizations, institutions are feeling uneasy at this moment. Now, about South-South cooperation, where you work, do you see this as an area likely to be further strengthened, supported, or it is an area that's likely to become, shall I say, tricky in terms of where its future is going to be?
If you look at the resolutions reached by member states at UN General Assembly, there are strong calls for South-South cooperation. And this is clear not only in the overall UN General Assembly resolution on South-South, but also a strong call embedded in the Doha Program of Action for least developed countries, and also the recently concluded Awaza Declaration and Plan of Action for landlocked developing countries, as well as Antigua-Barbuda Plan of Agenda for small island developing countries, SEAs.
Wow, UN has so many different declarations and documents, and those are very confusing to us. Exactly how strong these declarations and documents are compared to the other consensus.
So those consensus are reached by member states. and it needs to be implemented by member states, supported by international community. Yes, sometimes we see, oh, these are papers, but to me, working at the heart of the UN headquarters, I don't see it that way. I see diplomats from all over the world, and they bring expertise from their capitals. They invested in the negotiation and reached a consensus, and that represents aspirations of UN member states, and that needs to be taken seriously to be implemented. I cited all this, consensus and resolutions is to emphasize that that's the call from member states to strengthen UN's support to South-South cooperation. So I think the UN80 is to improve the way we work. The mandates are given by member states. So there are numerous mandates given by member states, and if we see where are the key priorities, then the UN could deliver that better through the UN80 reform.
What is China's role exactly right now in terms of its cooperation and working relationship with the UN on South-South?
China has been supporting South-South cooperation for decades. In the UN framework, China has contributed a lot to South-South cooperation. Just give you an example. One of the trust funds that I manage is UN Fund for South-South Cooperation. It's a pooled funding mechanism of member states contributing to deliver South-South cooperation together with UN system. China has been the largest contributor and the longest contributor to the UN Fund for South-South Cooperation. Not only by providing fund, China also works with UN system to advance South-South cooperation in a very pragmatic way by mutually sharing the experiences and collective action. China has demonstrated its own success in elevating poverty, and that experiences has been widely appreciated and adapted in some cases to achieve the goal of a poverty-free future.
There were earlier rhetorics, at least in the media, for example, that the United States is losing its interest in supporting the United Nations, at least for the next couple of years. Is that the time for China to step up and fill in the holes in which the U.S. left behind? What about that scenario for South-South cooperation?
Well, I think South-South cooperation has many active actors. China is one of them, and China is making a lot of contribution. But we also say South-South cooperation benefiting from experiences from other countries, big or small. Again, I can only say from my work experiences. For example, when I manage the UN Fund for South-South Cooperation, we also have a sub-fund established by India. That is India-UN Development Partnership Fund. We also have a fund associated with UN Fund for South-South Cooperation, but separately by India, Brazil, South Africa. We also have G77 Fund,
right.
Paris Guerrero Trust Fund. So I would say that developing countries, out of our own interest of advancing development, are contributing towards South-South cooperation agenda.
Now we see also more interactions between the United Nations and other international platforms and organizations in terms of South-South cooperation. For example, latest with the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit being held in Tianjin, in which the Secretary General also attended. Later, we saw documents coming out suggesting more interaction between the UN and SCO in terms of South-South cooperation. Now, how do you see synergy like this and new factors like this? How much will that change the landscape or transform the landscape of South-South cooperation of the UN system?
Actually, Secretary General has talked about inclusive and networked multilateralism. I think that is the way forward, because there are many multilateral arrangements at regional level or groups of countries. With UN collaborating with those mechanisms, all forces can move towards the same goal of sustainable development. And that is why UN has been strengthening its cooperation with regional institutions, with multilateral arrangements such as G20, such as BRICS, such as SCO. So only by all actors working together, we can achieve sustainable development goals.
All right. Thank you so much, Grace Wang. Always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
That is our latest interview in our special series celebrating 80th anniversary of the United Nations, United for the Future, the UN at 80. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us.